He slapped her in front of a full boarding gate, no hesitation, no apology, because to him, a black woman in seat 1A could only be a mistake. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just looked at him. And in that one silent stare, something shifted. What he didn't know. Cameras were rolling. Witnesses were everywhere. And she wasn't the one who would need to explain herself when the plane landed. This is not just a story about injustice. It's a warning. Behind every humiliated passenger they think no one will stand up for, there may be someone who's been watching, calculating, waiting. This series takes you inside real events, where abuse of power meets its reckoning, where silence turns into exposure, and arrogance crashes straight into truth at 35,000 feet. From denied boarding to deliberate humiliation, from whispered slurs to public takedowns. These aren't just stories, they are battlefields. So don't blink, don't skip. You're about to witness what happens when the people who get pushed out of line decide they're done being quiet. Tell us, where are you watching from? What part of the story stopped you in your tracks? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this hit you hard, and subscribe if you believe some people need to be reminded. The seat you paid for isn't a privilege, it's a right. Now, buckle up. The sky's not the limit. It's where everything gets exposed. He slapped her in front of a full boarding gate. No hesitation, no apology, because to him, a black woman in seat 1A could only be a mistake. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just looked at him. And in that one silent stare, something shifted. What he didn't know. Cameras were rolling. Witnesses were everywhere. And she wasn't the one who would need to explain herself when the plane landed. This is not just a story about injustice. It's a warning. Behind every humiliated passenger they think no one will stand up for, there may be someone who's been watching, calculating, waiting. This series takes you inside real events, where abuse of power meets its reckoning, where silence turns into exposure, and arrogance crashes straight into truth at 35,000 feet. From denied boarding to deliberate humiliation, from whispered slurs to public takedowns. These aren't just stories, they are battlefields. So don't blink, don't skip. You're about to witness what happens when the people who get pushed out of line decide they're done being quiet. Tell us, where are you watching from? What part of the story stopped you in your tracks? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if this high at exactly 7:14 a.m. The departure lounge at Terminal C buzzed with a controlled chaos of early boarding. Gate 26A had opened for Flight 407 to Denver, and passengers in first class began lining up, each clutching premium boarding passes like status symbols. Captain Jack Harper, 45, squared shoulders, square jaw, and a reputation that walked into rooms before he did, strolled through the terminal with the slow, assured gait of a man who believed he owned more than just the cockpit. To Jack, his authority didn't begin at the flight deck. It started the moment he entered the terminal and extended to every inch of the aircraft, including the passengers. Especially the passengers. As he neared the gate, his eyes scanned the line, doing what he often did without even realizing. Sorting. Businessmen in suits? Fine. Elderly couples with Tiffany tote bags? Acceptable. But then his gaze landed on something, or rather someone, he immediately flagged as not right. A black woman, late 40s, medium build, wearing fitted black jeans, clean tactical boots, and a navy hoodie zipped to the sternum, stood quietly in the first-class line. She held her phone in one hand, a dark leather backpack slung across her shoulder, posture straight, expression unreadable. Her boarding pass peeked from her phone case, marked with a golden 1A. Jack's brows drew down. Something didn't add up. That seat was usually held for off-duty crew, VIPs, or elite flyers. She didn't look the part, not to him. She didn't have a rolling designer suitcase, didn't have earbuds, didn't fidget or scan around nervously like someone excited about luxury travel. She stood there like she'd done this 100 times, calm and still, which only bothered Jack more. He walked up, lips already set in a disapproving line, and said in a clipped tone, "Ma'am, this line is for priority boarding. Coach is over there." The woman turned her head with practiced ease, her eyes meeting his. "I know," she replied, her tone polite but unbothered. I'm flying first class. Jack's hand lifted instinctively. Let me see your boarding pass. Without hesitation, she passed it over. Jack scanned it, saw the 1A again, and frowned. This must be a mistake. 1A is restricted. The woman met his gaze steadily. It's not. I booked it. Jack's lips curled. That seat's not normally assigned to passengers. I'm not normally assigned to coach, she replied. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the kind of voice that had been tempered by too many similar conversations, too many silent rooms, too many assumptions. He didn't like that answer. Jack stepped a little closer, lowering his voice but keeping the sharpness. If you want to get on this flight without issue, I suggest you don't make a scene. The woman raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. She extended her hand for the boarding pass. Jack didn't hand it back. Instead, he flicked his wrist and let the pass fall to the floor in front of her. You'll need to wait to the side while I confirm with dispatch, he said, already turning to the gate agent behind the desk. The woman calmly bent down, picked up the pass, dusted it lightly with her fingers, and stepped aside without a word. She stood near the windows now, where the sun angled through the glass and lit the quiet fire in her eyes. Jack leaned toward the agent, muttering low, "Run a security check on her again. Red flag the seat if you have to." The agent frowned. "She's TSA cleared, Jack. Global entry, known traveler. Everything's clean. She's pre-board authorized for 1A. She doesn't look like it," Jack said flatly. "Trust me on this." The agent hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. Jack stood there, arms folded across his chest like a sentry, watching the woman as she waited. She didn't pace. She didn't check her phone. She didn't try to film anything. She just stood, calm as a still lake, her expression unreadable. That bothered Jack more than anything. No flinching, no anger, just readiness. Other passengers filtered past her, glancing curiously. A middle-aged man with a golf cap gave her a once-over and then a shrug. A pair of college girls whispered, one muttering, "She must have tried to upgrade last minute." Jack noticed their murmurs and nodded subtly to himself, confident that the narrative was already spinning the way he wanted it. He believed he was keeping order, protecting his domain. But what Jack didn't see, what he couldn't see, was the way the woman's fingers occasionally tapped her thigh in a precise, steady rhythm. Not nervous energy, not fidgeting. No, it was training. She was calculating, watching him, clocking his body language, tone, posture, every interaction. Because this wasn't her first time being profiled. And it certainly wasn't going to be her last time being underestimated. But today wasn't about a seat. Today wasn't about boarding zones. Today was about bait. And Jack Harper had taken it, right on cue. To hard, and subscribe if you believe some people need to be reminded. The seat you paid for isn't a privilege, it's a right. Now, buckle up. The sky's not the limit. It's where everything gets exposed. The tension lingered like static in the air as Serena stood by the window, her gaze steady, her boarding pass gripped loosely between her fingers. The terminal's PA system crackled faintly in the background, announcing final boarding for other gates, but at 26A, time had slowed. Jack Harper remained stationed at the counter like a watchdog, arms crossed, radiating control. He didn't look at Serena anymore. He didn't have to. In his mind, she was already handled. But Serena wasn't finished. Not even close. 5 minutes passed before a uniformed airport supervisor arrived. A wiry man named Cliff Sandler with a receding hairline and clipboard in hand. Jack greeted him with a nod and gestured discreetly toward Serena. "Possible ID mismatch," Jack said under his breath. "Seat 1A." Cliff glanced in Serena's direction, brow furrowing. "She cleared TSA?" Jack nodded. Supposedly. Cliff approached Serena with a rehearsed smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ma'am," he began, "we've been asked to verify some details with your reservation." Serena didn't flinch. "Is there a problem with my ID?" she asked calmly. "Or my boarding pass?" Cliff hesitated. "Not exactly. It's just that there's a question about your seat assignment." 1A. Serena clarified. "Correct," Cliff said. "We're checking whether that row is reserved for active flight crew today." Standard protocol. Serena didn't blink. I booked that seat 3 weeks ago through the airline's direct site. Paid in full, confirmed. There was no note of restriction. Cliff nodded slowly, tapping his pen to his clipboard. I understand, but we've had issues lately with fraudulent upgrades. Passengers booking economy and switching digitally last minute. Serena raised an eyebrow. You think I hacked your system? Cliff cleared his throat. I didn't say that. You implied it. Her tone was still quiet, but each syllable landed with precision. Behind them, Jack watched with thinly veiled amusement, like a man enjoying the unraveling of a situation he orchestrated. Other passengers began to notice the hold-up. A few glanced toward Serena, whispering. One woman in a camel trench coat tilted her sunglasses down and muttered, "Probably a scam seat." Another, seated nearby, whispered to her partner, "She doesn't look like someone who flies first class." Serena caught every word but remained silent. Cliff, sensing the crowd's growing attention, shifted nervously. "If you'll come with me to the secondary desk, we can reissue your seat while we verify." Reissue. Serena interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "To where?" "Likely main cabin," Cliff replied, too quickly. "Just temporarily." Serena stared at him, then slowly exhaled through her nose. "I won't be moving." Her voice was low, controlled, but the authority behind it was unmistakable. Cliff's smile faltered. "Then I'll have to escalate this," he said, glancing back toward Jack, who gave him a tight nod. "Fine," Serena replied. "Do what you need to do." Within seconds, 2 TSA agents arrived at the gate, called under the guise of a potential disruption. They didn't approach aggressively, but the implication was clear. One of them, a tall woman named Ortiz, approached Serena with open palms. "Ma'am, we're just here to de-escalate," she said. "Can you come with us for a brief check?" Serena looked her directly in the eyes. "Am I being detained?" Ortiz blinked. "No, ma'am. It's just a precaution." "Then I'll stay right here," Serena said. Ortiz hesitated, then looked to Cliff, who now appeared visibly uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Jack leaned against the wall, arms folded smugly, whispering something to a passing flight attendant. Should have known. They always pull something like this. Serena's gaze flicked toward him, just for a second. She heard it. She heard it all. Cliff took a step forward, trying a different angle. "Look, we're just trying to make sure all our passengers are where they're supposed to be. We don't want any misunderstandings." "There's no misunderstanding," Serena said. "You're responding to something that was never a problem until a black woman stood in line for 1A. Her words cut clean through the air. Silence fell. Even the gate agent behind the counter stopped typing. Passengers nearby shifted, some uncomfortably. A man in a gray blazer muttered, "She's not wrong." Still, Cliff pressed. "We can still make this easy, ma'am." "You've already made it hard," she said flatly. Then, without raising her voice, she added, "But I won't forget who stood by and who stood down." At that moment, an announcement rang overhead. Final boarding call for Flight 407. Cliff checked his watch, flustered. Jack, realizing time was ticking, stepped in one last time. "This is your final chance," he said to Serena. "If you want to fly today, you need to move. Now." Serena didn't budge. She didn't speak. She simply reached into her back pocket and pulled out her phone. One thumb swipe. One call. She pressed the screen to her ear and said, in a voice that was now sharp and direct, "Activate protocol." Target confirmed. "I'm in position." Cliff blinked. Jack frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" he asked. Serena locked eyes with him, a hint of something deadly calm in her tone. "It means you just made this personal." The silence that followed Serena's cryptic phone call struck differently. Jack's smirk faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty flashing across his eyes. Cliff stepped back, as if a chill had swept through the terminal. TSA agent Ortiz subtly touched her earpiece, muttering something under her breath while pretending to check her clipboard. Serena lowered her phone slowly, her thumb hovering just above the lock screen, as if waiting for a response only she could anticipate. The mood at Gate 26 had shifted, but Jack, driven by a fragile ego reinforced by years of unchecked authority, refused to retreat. He stepped forward, voice low but seething. "You think a call's going to scare me?" he said, lips curling into a tight grin. "You're not special, lady. You're just another disruptive passenger about to be blacklisted." Serena tilted her head slightly. "Is that the official language you use when assaulting paying customers?" Jack blinked. "What did you say?" "You heard me," she replied calmly. "You've put your hands on my property. You've obstructed my right to board a flight I lawfully paid for. And now you're attempting intimidation in front of TSA and multiple witnesses. So I'll ask again, are you sure you want to escalate this?" Jack's nostrils flared. His right hand curled into a fist, then relaxed. "I'm escalating nothing. You're the one making this complicated." Cliff tried to interrupt, but Serena raised one hand, never looking away from Jack. "Let him finish," she said. "I want to hear exactly how far he's willing to dig this hole." Jack's jaw clenched. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he did something no one expected. He lunged forward, snatching the boarding pass from her hand. The crowd gasped. One of the TSA agents stepped between them too late. Serena's boarding pass fluttered to the ground as Jack turned to the gate counter and barked, "Revoke this ticket now. She's a security risk." "You don't have that authority," Cliff snapped, his voice suddenly louder. But Jack ignored him. "I'm the pilot of this aircraft," Jack shouted, now addressing everyone within earshot. "And I won't have her on my plane." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the boarding area. A woman holding a toddler clutched her child tighter. An older man shook his head and muttered, "This isn't 1955. Serena, still unmoved, bent down slowly to retrieve her pass. She stood and faced Jack fully now, her body relaxed, voice even. "You just put your hands on me, Captain Harper." Again, witnessed by TSA, gate staff, and at least 12 passengers. Jack opened his mouth, but no words came out. His bluster had hit a wall, her composure. Ortiz finally stepped in with authority. "Captain Harper, step back," she ordered, placing one arm in front of Serena. "You've crossed a line." "You don't get to tell me how to run my crew," Jack barked. "She's creating a threat." "No," Serena said. "I'm revealing one." With perfect timing, her phone buzzed softly. A single message lit up the screen. "Confirmed. Proceed." She turned it so that only she could see the full contents, then locked it again. "Do you know how many complaints have been filed against you in the last 4 years?" she asked, her tone casual, almost conversational. "How many female pilots and junior flight attendants you've mentored and then silenced?" Jack froze. "What did you just say?" 3 complaints swept under the rug by the union, 1 non-disclosure settlement paid by the airline, and 6 unofficial statements from former staffers who say you've made racial or sexist remarks in the cockpit. "I read every one." Cliff paled. Ortiz's partner looked toward the security desk. "Who the hell are you?" Jack asked, his voice shaking now not with rage, but fear. Serena's smile was tight, her eyes sharp. "I'm the one who's been watching you for 6 months. Logging every incident. Following every gate report. Studying your patterns. And now, thanks to you losing your temper in public, I finally have what I need." Jack looked around, expecting someone to come to his defense, but no one moved. Not Cliff. Not the TSA. Not even the gate agent he'd barked orders at. The crowd had turned. Eyes that once looked confused or complicit now stared with something else, awareness. "You don't have jurisdiction," Jack muttered. "You're bluffing." Serena reached into her back pocket again. "You want to bet your career on that," she said. From a slim black wallet, she pulled a badge. Not a shiny plastic ID. A real, metal, federally issued shield. She didn't hold it up yet. She just let it gleam for a second in the light, then slipped it back out of sight. "That wasn't for you," she said to Jack. "That was for the cameras." Jack's face drained of color as Serena slid the badge back into her pocket with deliberate control, its fleeting shine still echoing in the eyes of everyone around. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out this time. Only breath, shallow and uneven. He could feel the pressure of dozens of eyes on him, not with admiration or obedience, but with judgment. The audience he had once dominated now viewed him not as a leader, but a liability. Cliff looked between Jack and Serena, his throat bobbing as he swallowed a hard truth. He had backed the wrong man. The TSA agents exchanged a brief glance, and then Ortiz stepped forward, pulling out her radio and murmuring something indistinct into the receiver. Serena didn't flinch, didn't gloat, didn't even smirk. She simply watched. Her calmness had evolved from silence into authority. Undeniable, unshakable authority. A gate supervisor from Central Operations, a woman in a dark blue blazer with a Delta insignia, arrived at the scene, led by a junior ground agent who was clearly rattled. The supervisor, Rebecca Lang, approached Serena first. "Ma'am," she said with cautious respect, "we've been informed there was a physical altercation. Would you like to file an official report?" Serena didn't answer right away. She looked at Jack, who still hadn't moved, and then back at Rebecca. "It's being handled," she said. "But yes, I want it documented. Every detail, every witness, every second of footage." Rebecca nodded quickly, gesturing for another staff member to begin logging names. Jack finally stirred, his voice low, desperate. "You have no right to do this. You're not even part of this airline." Serena took one slow step forward, her boots silent against the terminal floor. "Wrong again," she said, tone neutral. "I'm part of a federal oversight program tasked with auditing commercial aviation conduct, safety compliance, and civil rights violations." She paused, let it hang. "You just made my job easier." A murmur rippled through the passengers, louder than before. The whisper of federal had changed everything. A woman who had been filming whispered, "She's with the government." A young man in business casual turned to his colleague and muttered, "Damn, he really messed up." Still, Jack tried to fight back. "You set this up. This whole thing was a setup. You provoked me." Serena leaned in, just enough for him to hear. "I gave you choices," she said. "You chose this." Her voice held no malice, only precision. It landed harder than any threat. Rebecca Lang motioned to a security detail, now gathering on the edge of the crowd. "Captain Harper, I'm afraid I'll need you to surrender your badge and step aside while this incident is reviewed." Jack turned to her sharply. "You're not in charge of my crew." Rebecca's voice didn't raise, but it firmed. "No, but I'm in charge of this gate. And until this plane leaves the ground, that makes me your superior." Jack stood frozen for a moment, shoulders hunched, chest heaving slightly. Then, in a final act of delusional defiance, he reached into his flight jacket, pulled out his captain's wings, and dropped them on the counter with a metallic clatter that echoed through the hushed gate. "You're all going to regret this," he muttered. Serena didn't blink. "No," she said, "you will." Jack turned and stormed away down the terminal, his stride furious but hollow. Nobody followed. Nobody called out. Cliff didn't move. Rebecca turned back to Serena. "Would you like to reboard now, ma'am?" Serena hesitated, scanning the faces of the passengers still clustered nearby. Many now looked at her with awe, some with guilt, others with a dawning respect. "Yes," she said at last, her voice low, "but I'll need to check something first." She pulled out her phone again, opened an encrypted folder, and reviewed a file titled Delta Internal Conduct Report Harper Series. After skimming a few lines, she added a new note, "Observed escalation. Physical contact confirmed. Witnesses recorded. Uniform removal voluntary, but witnessed." Then she locked the phone, nodded to Rebecca, and walked calmly toward the boarding door. As she passed the remaining passengers, one older woman in a beige coat leaned over and said almost in a whisper, "Thank you for doing what no one else ever could." Serena gave a faint nod, but didn't stop. In her mind, she wasn't finished. This wasn't justice. This was only exposure. Justice came next. Behind her, Cliff finally exhaled and leaned against the counter, shoulders slumped, eyes vacant. He had misjudged the entire encounter, and now the world was watching. In the minutes that followed, Serena took her seat in 1A, calm, collected, and entirely back in control. The boarding door clicked shut behind Serena as she settled into seat 1A, her composure undisturbed, her breathing even. The cabin around her slowly regained rhythm, Passengers buckled seatbelts, overhead compartments clicked into place, and the soft chime of the intercom signaled final preparations for takeoff. But beneath the surface, tension lingered like smog in still air. Though Jack Harper had been removed, the wake of his presence remained embedded in the crew's posture, the way their glances darted toward Serena and quickly away. The cockpit door remained closed, unusually quiet. Serena's eyes briefly shifted to the first officer's seat. No movement, no welcome. Flight 407 was technically ready for departure, but spiritually, it sat in limbo. A flight attendant named Elise, mid-30s with a practiced airline smile and eyes that didn't quite match it, approached Serena hesitantly. "Can I offer you a beverage before takeoff, ma'am?" Serena looked at her, noting the strain in her voice, the subtle edge of nervousness. "Water," she said simply. Elise nodded and left, moving with briskness that betrayed discomfort. Moments later, Serena heard hushed whispers from the galley behind the curtain. She caught fragments. "Can't believe they pulled him. This is going to get messy. She doesn't even look like law enforcement." Serena didn't react. She had heard worse in tighter spaces, in more dangerous settings, from men far more dangerous than a commercial pilot on a power trip. What they didn't realize was that she wasn't here to argue about seating or bruised egos. She was here to expose a system. Elise returned with the water, placing it on the tray table with a soft clink. "We'll be pushing back shortly," she said, then paused, lowering her voice. "Just so you know, the co-pilot refused to fly." Serena didn't look surprised. "Why?" "He says he doesn't feel safe flying without Harper. Said it's about protocol." But Elise didn't finish. Serena nodded. "Understood." She pulled her phone from the side pocket of her bag, opened a secure channel, and typed quickly. "Flight 407. Command disruption due to pilot insubordination. Confirm protocol override." The reply came in seconds. "Override granted. Federal co-pilot en route to Jet Bridge. Stand by." Serena locked her screen and looked out the window. On the tarmac below, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the base of the jet bridge. Two figures emerged, one in a crisp uniform bearing no commercial airline insignia, the other in a black suit with a silver ID badge clipped to the lapel. Within minutes, a knock sounded at the cockpit. Elise opened the door. The new arrival stepped in. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Maddox of the Federal Aviation Integrity Task Force. A former Navy aviator, Maddox didn't speak as he entered. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. The original first officer, James Bell, stood up from the pilot seat, clearly agitated. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "This isn't your operation." Maddox's voice was calm and direct. "It is now. Under Title 49, Section 44903, you've been relieved." James glared at him, then at Serena through the open cockpit door. "She planned this," he muttered. "You're damn right I did," Serena said without raising her voice. "And you just gave me everything I needed to justify it." James looked at Maddox again, waiting for some gesture of support that never came. Finally, he shoved his headset down and walked off the plane. No applause followed. No sympathy lingered. The only sound was the click of the cockpit door locking behind him as Maddox took his seat. Serena leaned back in hers, exhaled slowly, and sipped her water. The plane began to taxi, inching away from the gate. The silence in the cabin was no longer one of hesitation. It was one of reckoning. Elise reappeared, checking on passengers. She paused at Serena's row, hesitant. I didn't know what was really happening," she said quietly. "None of us did." Serena studied her. "You know now," she replied. "That's what matters." Passengers who had witnessed the earlier chaos sat in contemplative silence, occasionally glancing towards seat 1A with a mix of curiosity, awe, and growing respect. Serena remained composed, her body still, but her mind moved quickly, compiling everything. Each breach, each witness, every recorded word. Across the aisle, a man in his 30s in a gray blazer tapped rapidly on his phone, clearly live tweeting. 3 rows back, a teenage girl whispered to her mother, "She's not just a cop. She's something bigger." The sentiment was spreading. Not through Serena's words, but through what she didn't say. Power, when it's real, doesn't need to shout. Meanwhile, in the galley near the front of the plane, two flight attendants huddled close, voices low but urgent. Elise stood between them, her face pale, her hands wringing. "I didn't know who she was," she said again and again. "I just thought she looked out of place." The junior attendant, a redhead barely in her 20s, looked shaken. But she didn't act out. He did. The pilot. We all saw it. He shoved her. The third, a man named Derek, crossed his arms tightly, jaw clenched. "He's done that before," he muttered. The others turned to him, stunned. Derek hesitated, then spoke softer. "Captain Harper. He once pushed a trainee out of a cockpit for touching a dial without permission. Said she was too emotional to fly. We all laughed it off. But she never came back after that flight." Elise looked like she'd been struck. "Why didn't you report him?" "Because no one listens when it's just the crew," Derek replied bitterly. "But they're listening now." In the cockpit, Maddox piloted the plane with ease, his voice calm and efficient as he coordinated with air traffic control. Every movement, every call out, followed textbook protocol. This wasn't just about completing the flight, it was about resetting the standard. Maddox had taken control not to save face, but to protect the sky from people like Harper. Behind him, Serena's presence radiated like a silent watchdog. She wasn't micromanaging. She didn't need to. Her investigation had already passed the threshold. Everything from this point forward was documentation, verification, confirmation. The system had failed. But now the system was watching itself bleed. Back in the main cabin, a woman with salt and pepper curls retrieved her phone from airplane mode and quietly began uploading the video she'd recorded during the altercation at the gate. She didn't post it to her personal feed. She sent it directly to a news desk. Within seconds, the subject line hit inboxes. "Captain assaults black passenger. Woman turns out to be federal officer." The viral ignition had begun. At the same time, Cliff Sandler, still in the terminal, stood frozen in front of the monitor displaying Flight 407's takeoff confirmation. He hadn't moved since Harper walked out, guilt soaked into his collar. He hadn't just misjudged Serena, he had enabled Jack for years. He had heard the offhand comments, the dismissive remarks toward young black flight attendants, the jokes that made women walk away tight-lipped. But he had always written it off as old-school leadership. Now he realized it was systemic rot, and his silence was fertilizer. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and opened the internal HR contact list. His thumb hovered above the number. Then he scrolled past it. Not enough. He opened another list, this one, direct to the FAA Ethics Division. He pressed dial. Back on the flight, Serena opened her tablet, flipping through encrypted case files. Her expression stayed steady, but her eyes flickered with sharp intent. She paused at a file labeled Harper Conduct Trail Delta Internal Reports plus Union Blocks. She selected Merge External Evidence. A prompt appeared. Upload from live incident. Serena tapped yes. The interface began to compile footage from 3 different passenger videos and transcribe audio into searchable text. Everything Jack said, every slur, every denial, every threat, archived, time-stamped, federal evidence. In row 6, a young woman leaned forward and said quietly to her husband, she just rewrote the whole playbook. On the ground, pilots are gods. But up here, she outranked him. Her husband nodded slowly, and he didn't see it coming. Just then, a chime sounded. The intercom crackled. Maddox's voice came on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your acting captain. We are currently cruising at 34,000 feet. Estimated time to Denver remains 3 hours and 15 minutes. As the plane sliced through the atmosphere, steady and silent, Serena remained anchored in her seat, not just as a passenger, but as the eye of a gathering storm. The data upload completed on her tablet with a soft chime, confirming that every second of Jack Harper's meltdown had been stored, backed up, and securely transmitted to the federal database. But her work wasn't finished, not until the very people who allowed him to thrive were forced to confront what they enabled. She turned off the screen, closed the tablet, and set it beside her, folding her hands on her lap as if preparing for a meeting that had been scheduled long before boarding. In the cockpit, Maddox flew with the quiet efficiency of a man trained not just in aviation, but in operations far more clandestine. He didn't speak unless necessary, but his eyes flicked to the cabin monitor where seat 1A remained in view. He knew who sat there, and more importantly, he knew what her presence signaled. Maddox wasn't just flying a plane, he was escorting a mission, midair, under code clearance. At the rear of first class, Elise approached with a tray, visibly uneasy. She hesitated, then stepped closer to Serena. "Ma'am," she said, barely above a whisper, "I don't mean to disturb, but the crew, we didn't know who you were." If I'd known." Serena held up a hand. "It's not your job to know who I am," she said calmly. "It's your job to treat every passenger like they matter, whether they're someone's mother or someone's boss, or someone who can bring the entire system down." Elise swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, ma'am." "And now you do," Serena said, softly but without warmth. The exchange didn't end in anger, but it left Elise shaken. She turned and walked briskly back toward the galley, her heart pounding, replaying every moment she'd stood silent at the gate, every time she'd ignored something just to avoid tension. In row 3, a middle-aged man in a Rolex and cufflinks leaned into the aisle and whispered to his neighbor, "You think she's FBI?" "Nah," the other said, higher. "She walks like someone who writes the rules." They weren't wrong. 35 minutes later, a ping came from the cockpit intercom. Maddox's voice, calm and formal, echoed through the speakers. "We'd like to ask all passengers seated in the forward cabin to remain in their seats momentarily. We're making a high-level announcement on behalf of the U.S. Department of Transportation." A hush fell over the cabin. Serena stood without fanfare and walked toward the front. As she passed the rows, some passengers leaned aside. Others simply stared. Every step she took carried the weight of something inevitable. When she reached the galley, Maddox opened the cockpit door slightly and handed her a secure device, a small black case with a biometric lock and a flashing blue indicator. Serena accepted it, turned back to the cabin, and stepped into the aisle. The flight attendants cleared the path instinctively. Serena didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Good afternoon," she said. "My name is Serena Brooks. I'm a federal operations auditor under the Office of Civil Aviation Oversight, reporting directly to the Department of Transportation and cross-certified with the Department of Justice." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the rows. Her voice remained even. "I've been working undercover for the past 6 months as part of a federal probe into systemic misconduct in the commercial airline sector, specifically targeting abuse of authority, civil rights violations, and patterns of racial and gender discrimination enabled by airline management and union interference." One of the businessmen who had once rolled his eyes now stared in stunned silence. The woman who'd whispered about Serena not belonging now sank lower in her seat. Serena held up the black device. What happened at Gate 26A today was not only anticipated, it was recorded and submitted to a real-time chain of command. She paused. Captain Jack Harper was not just relieved of duty. As of 20 minutes ago, he was placed under formal investigation pending federal charges. The co-pilot who refused to fly was also cited for obstruction of protocol under flight regulations. Behind her, Maddox stepped into the aisle and stood quietly as confirmation. Serena's eyes swept the cabin once more. This flight, this crew, and every interaction today was part of a compliance integrity test. And those who failed it, she looked directly at the forward camera lens mounted in the ceiling, will answer for it. The silence that followed was deeper than any turbulence. It wasn't just shock, it was accountability finally arriving midair. Serena returned to her seat, unfastened the case, and removed a stack of sealed federal notices. She began signing each with clean, decisive strokes. Her role wasn't theoretical anymore. It was active, and the evidence had already been set in motion. Behind her, passengers began whispering again, but this time not with judgment, not with doubt, but with something close to reverence. They now understood that she wasn't the problem. She had been the solution all along. A mirror. A reckoning. A quiet authority made visible. And Jack Harper, wherever he now sat, could no longer hide behind a title or a uniform. His name had just entered a system far larger than he could imagine, and Serena Brooks was the one who had placed it there. The weight of Serena's announcement still hovered in the cabin like residual thunder. Even as she returned to her seat, even as the engines hummed and trays clinked quietly in the galley, the mood on board had irrevocably shifted. There was no going back to casual conversations or routine service. What had just unfolded wasn't merely a disruption. It was a revelation. Every passenger knew, whether they admitted it aloud or not, that they had just witnessed something seismic. But what came next would shake more than just those aboard Flight 407. 37,000 feet below, in a corner office of the Department of Transportation's Internal Aviation Oversight Unit in D.C., a server blinked to life. Serena's footage, cross-synced from her tablet, from passenger recordings, from surveillance at Gate 26A, had arrived, encrypted, verified, and now opened under federal review. Two analysts leaned forward over the monitors. One of them, Marissa Yates, a compliance officer with a sharp eye for policy breaches, narrowed her gaze at the screen as the scene played. "He really did it," she whispered, watching Jack Harper slap the boarding pass from Serena's hand. "In uniform. In public." Her colleague nodded grimly. He laid hands on a federal officer, used language with racial intent, and obstructed reboarding rights. This isn't just a firing. It's criminal. Within seconds, the footage was flagged with red tags for escalation. Lines of code blinked across the screen as every frame was broken into timestamps. By the time the plane was halfway to Denver, Harper's personnel file had been locked, marked for legal freeze, and delivered to 3 independent review boards. Meanwhile, up in the sky, Serena's phone vibrated quietly with a response from D.C., a message that simply read, "Initiate full exposure." She leaned back, turned on airplane Wi-Fi under encrypted mode, and opened a distribution platform reserved for federal crisis communication. With 2 taps, she unlocked a public transparency protocol that made the key details of the investigation visible to cooperating press and advocacy groups nationwide. That's when it started. The ripple. The explosion. Serena didn't announce it. She didn't even look up. But all around the cabin, phones began to buzz. A woman in row 7 glanced at her screen, then gasped, "Oh my God, she's everywhere." "Who?" her partner asked. "Her, Serena Brooks. It's trending. She's on the front page of 3 news apps. This whole flight, the pilot, everything." In seconds, Twitter, now X, erupted with hashtags. Hashtag Flight 407, hashtag Serena Brooks, hashtag Sky Justice, hashtag Harper Exposed. News alerts pinged across time zones. Videos of the gate confrontation reached over 800,000 views before the seatbelt light turned back on. Harper's name, once guarded by layers of seniority and union protection, now sat front and center on the digital chopping block. Headlines flared: "Pilot assaults passenger, doesn't know she's federal agent." DOJ and DOT joint operation uncovers racial abuse in commercial aviation. Harper suspended. FAA investigates culture of cover-up. On the plane, several passengers began shifting in their seats, some turning their screens to each other, showing the articles, the posts, the clips now going viral. One teenager muttered, "She just took down an entire legacy in under 3 hours." But Serena wasn't looking for fame. She wasn't celebrating. She was calculating. Quietly, methodically, she began tagging and archiving every comment, every post, every digital reaction to build what she referred to in her field as the Ripple Ledger, a document of public response that would support the need for widespread reform. Across the aisle, Elise approached again, but this time her expression had changed, not afraid, not even apologetic, but determined. "MS. Brooks," she said softly, "would it help if the crew gave formal statements when we land?" Serena studied her for a second, then nodded once. "Yes. Include timestamps. Everything you saw, everything you heard." Elise nodded and retreated, her pace no longer hesitant. In the cockpit, Maddox received a secure message through the military-grade comm system. He read the short dispatch, then turned on the cabin speaker. "To all passengers and crew," he began, voice low but commanding. "This is your acting captain. Due to new developments and ongoing investigations, please be advised that upon landing, the aircraft will be met by federal agents and agency representatives. There is no cause for alarm. You will be asked to remain seated momentarily as an official debriefing is initiated." Gasps rose. One man reached for his suit jacket reflexively. Another passenger leaned toward the window, scanning the sky as if expecting to see fighter jets. Serena remained still, calm, eyes focused. The mission had escalated exactly as intended, not for the sake of spectacle, but to send an unmistakable message to every tier of power that had failed to act. As Flight 407 began its slow descent into Denver airspace, the ground teams were already in place. Media vans lined the edge of the service lot outside the secure terminal. DOJ agents coordinated with airline executives. And in the background, dozens of former employees, women and men who had once been silenced, watched the coverage unfold with disbelief and, for the first time, vindication. In 1A, Serena clipped her ID to her collar and retrieved a sealed envelope from her carry-on. Inside it were 16 affidavits, all from victims and whistleblowers, some recent, some years old. She had promised to carry their voices with her. The cabin remained eerily silent, every soul aboard fully aware that they weren't arriving into a routine layover. They were landing in the center of a storm. Serena sat motionless in seat 1A, posture firm, hands folded neatly over the folder in her lap containing sworn affidavits and sealed legal documents. Her eyes didn't flicker toward the window, didn't glance at the terminal rushing past outside. She was focused, grounded, as if already standing in the courtroom she had spent the last 8 months preparing for. From the moment the aircraft slowed on the tarmac, signs of the fallout were visible. A black SUV flanked by 2 government sedans waited at the edge of the restricted runway. Near the service stairs, a van marked with DOJ insignia idled silently, its tinted windows hiding the agents inside. Serena's phone lit up with a short message from her handler in D.C. "Your footage triggered an automatic escalation. FAA Senior Counsel is on site. Do not deplane until ground contact established." In the back of the plane, nervous whispers broke out among the passengers. One man removed his headphones slowly, scanning the cabin as if unsure whether to speak or pray. A young woman across the aisle whispered, "This doesn't happen unless something's gone very, very wrong." In the cockpit, Maddox kept the intercom on standby. His hands moved over the controls with practiced grace, but his jaw remained tight. He had flown missions under more hostile circumstances, but never with this level of civil consequence. On cue, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Denver International Airport," Maddox said, voice calm and crisp. "We've arrived safely, but we ask that all passengers remain seated. Due to unique circumstances, we are under restricted protocol." That phrase, restricted protocol, sent an unmistakable message. This wasn't a delay. This was federal. A second chime followed, and then the door at the front of the aircraft opened. A jet bridge was never attached. Instead, 2 federal agents boarded directly from the tarmac stairs, both dressed in dark suits with minimalist earpieces and clipped badges. One stepped forward and addressed the crew. "We're here for Officer Brooks, and to take full custody of the evidence gathered aboard this flight. No one leaves this aircraft until she authorizes debrief." Serena stood without hesitation. She nodded to Maddox, who opened the cockpit door wider, allowing her full access to the internal comm system. She picked up the cabin phone, pressed a button, and her voice filled the aircraft. "This is Officer Serena Brooks, Federal Auditor and Lead Investigator in Operation Airstream. You have just completed the central leg of a monitored compliance flight under federal jurisdiction. Every interaction on board this aircraft and leading up to it has been recorded and stored for agency use. If you witnessed misconduct, or if you were involved in any exchange with former Captain Harper or his affiliates, you will be asked to provide a statement within the next 24 hours. You may also request legal counsel. Remain seated. A briefing packet is being distributed to each of you for formal instruction. The cabin didn't erupt with questions. No outrage. No panic. Just stillness. The kind that only arrives when people realize they're part of something larger than they imagined. The DOJ agents began moving down the aisle, handing out the sealed briefing folders one by one. A few passengers, particularly those who had recorded video, received special red-labeled envelopes. Their footage was now evidence. Back on the ground, inside the airline's corporate headquarters a few miles from the airport, Jack Harper's face flashed across multiple internal monitors as live news coverage looped through every major outlet. The CEO, Gerald Wallace, a silver-haired executive with a deep frown etched into his face, watched in mounting horror. His legal counsel stood beside him, tight-lipped, holding a printed copy of the FAA's emergency inquiry notice. "They're freezing our crew records," the attorney said, "effective immediately. And they're invoking 14C compliance review. That's the full audit." Gerald didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on Serena's image, captured mid-speech inside the aircraft, a still frame now circulating every hour on national news. "She's going to burn this place to the ground," he muttered. "No," the lawyer corrected. "She's going to clean it." Within minutes, for senior managers from Human Resources were suspended, including 2 union liaisons and a compliance officer who had personally buried complaints against Harper for over a decade. Whistleblowers previously ignored began contacting the hotline Serena's office had activated, and by noon, more than 70 new incident reports had flooded the FAA's integrity server. On the tarmac, Serena stepped out of the aircraft under escort. No press was allowed near her. No cameras were permitted to follow. The flight crew watched from inside the cabin windows as she disappeared into the federal van like a shadow returning to the fog. But they knew she wasn't gone. She was just getting started. Elise stood frozen in the aisle, briefing folder still clutched in hand. She turned to Derek, her voice low. "They're going to clean house." Derek nodded once. "Good. It's long overdue." 3 days after Flight 407 touched down in Denver, the name Jack Harper was no longer whispered inside hangars or offices. It was headline material. He had gone from decorated senior pilot to suspended defendant under federal investigation, stripped of his credentials and placed on the FAA's no-fly register. The footage from the gate, the onboard confrontation, and Serena's in-flight address had gone global, igniting public outcry far beyond aviation circles. Industry leaders who once scoffed at systemic reform were now publicly pledging cooperation. But Serena wasn't interested in promises. She was interested in accountability. On the 5th day, a federal hearing convened behind closed doors in Washington, D.C., involving representatives from the FAA, the DOJ, DOT, airline executives, and selected media observers. In the center of the hearing chamber, under the soft echo of recessed lighting and the weight of government protocol, Serena Brooks sat poised, wearing a sharp charcoal suit with a single silver pen clipped to her lapel. Her testimony was not theatrical. It didn't need to be. She laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon, dates, names, recorded conversations, official memos buried by HR departments, pilot rosters doctored to protect repeat offenders, and union documents that quietly enabled serial abusers like Harper to keep flying while their accusers were silenced, reassigned, or dismissed. She submitted physical evidence, digital logs, and the sworn affidavits she had carried aboard Flight 407, each one now stamped into permanent record. When the lead commissioner asked her how she maintained composure during the confrontation at Gate 26A, Serena answered without hesitation, "Because it wasn't about me. It was about every person who ever sat quietly in row 34, who was told to move, to shrink, to accept less because someone else decided they didn't belong. I didn't hold my ground for ego. I held it for evidence." The chamber remained quiet for several moments after that. Outside, protesters gathered peacefully, holding signs that read "Justice at 30,000 feet, let her speak for us all," and "Respect is not a class upgrade." Inside the airline's headquarters, the fallout continued. Gerald Wallace, the CEO, had issued a formal resignation letter citing moral failure in executive oversight. The company board, under public and legal pressure, voted to implement the full list of reforms Serena's department had submitted over a year prior. Reforms they had ignored until now. This included mandatory bias training for flight crews, third-party complaint audits, and the removal of arbitration clauses that prevented employees from pursuing civil rights claims. Harper, meanwhile, was preparing for a criminal trial. His attorney attempted a defense based on stress and long-term occupational burnout, but the mountain of evidence crushed any narrative of misunderstanding. The footage didn't just show a bad moment. It revealed a pattern, a mindset, a man who had never been challenged until the day he mistook a federal officer for an inconvenience. Back in Atlanta, Serena returned to her office quietly. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't sit for interviews. She simply resumed her work. There were more names on her desk, more reports, more rot to clean. But something had changed. This time, people were watching and listening. In the weeks that followed, 3 more commercial carriers contacted her division requesting voluntary compliance reviews. 2 whistleblowers came forward with new information. An intern who had once been dismissed for raising concerns was rehired as part of a new internal ethics team. Change wasn't fast and it wasn't loud, but it was real. One morning, Serena received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "I watched you on Flight 407. I didn't speak. I should have. But I saw what you did. And now, I won't stay silent the next time." Serena folded the paper and placed it in her desk drawer alongside the others. Dozens of them, each from strangers, allies, former enemies, all transformed by witnessing what happens when one woman stands her ground. In a closed-door debriefing months later, when asked what the turning point had been for the investigation, she didn't mention the badge or the footage or the federal orders. She simply said, "The turning point was when he dropped my boarding pass." That single act of arrogance had unraveled a career, exposed a culture, and proved to the world that justice, when it arrives, doesn't always wear sirens and flash. Sometimes it wears silence, stillness, a seatbelt in 1A. But it changes everything. Serena never asked for recognition. She asked for accountability. And by the time the skies cleared over Flight 407, she had taken back what too many thought they could deny her: dignity, power, and the right to be exactly where she belonged. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful narratives that uncover truth and demand justice. We want to hear your thoughts. What part of the story hit you the hardest? Did Serena's calm response surprise you? What would you have done in her place? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and be part of the conversation.